Moving along, all right, we've batted around this word subluxation quite a bit already, and I have yet to define it. Well, folks, it's easier for me to tell you what it's not because, quite frankly, it's not anything. It's never been demonstrated during surgery. It's never been identified at autopsy. It has never been visualized with any type of imaging, not X-ray, not CT, not MRI. It just flat out doesn't exist. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, the chiropractors themselves have a very difficult time getting a handle on this whole concept of subluxation. So back in 1996, the presidents of the then 16 chiropractic colleges got together and they tried to give it a definition. Here's what they said. They said a subluxation is a complex of functional and/or structural and/or pathological articular changes that compromise neural integrity and may affect organ system function and general health. And that's on their website, chirocolleges.org, as of today, or at least as of September. Folks, is that about as meaningless and nebulous a statement as you've ever heard? Does the word vague come to mind? I mean, did they say anything there? Because I don't know what they're talking about. I don't think they said anything. Well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, gosh, that was 12 years ago. Maybe they've come up with a better definition. In fact, they have. There's a document that was published. This is one of my most prized possessions. It's called the Job Analysis of Chiropractic 2005, and it was published by the National Board of Chiropractic Examiners. This is not some fringe group like the WCA. This is the organization that's responsible for their national licensing. I mean, this is a serious organization. And I've got a quote right out of this text regarding what a subluxation is, and here's what it says. A subluxation is a health concern which through complex anatomical and physiological relationships manifests in the joints, affects the nervous system, and may lead to reduced function, disability, or illness. Folks, sounds like the same thing to me. Another vague, meaningless, nebulous statement. So again, the bottom line is there's no such thing as a subluxation. It just flat out doesn't exist. Okay. So far, we've been talking for about 15 minutes, and basically what I've told you is that chiropractic is just a bunch of nonsense, right? That's what I've really, if you really had to summarize what I've said it's just a bunch of quackery and voodoo and nonsense. So am I right or am I not right? Well, if I'm right, if I'm on target, how is it possible that in 2008, the chiropractors practicing a bunch of nonsense have achieved the degree of legitimacy that they've achieved today? Because there's no argument that they have achieved a relatively high level of respect and legitimacy. Well, the answer is quite simple, and I call this the milestones to legitimacy. Achieving through legislation what others, like you and I, have achieved through education and training. So let's go through these one at a time. With regard to state licensure laws, ladies and gentlemen, by 1928, 32 of the then 48 states had already granted licensure laws to chiropractors. Again, way back when conventional health care was pretty questionable. But one of the states that held out the longest was the great state of New York. And in 1963, after battling back the powerful chiropractic lobby for over 50 years, the lawmakers in New York said, you know what, we finally got to do something one way or the other. We're tired of battling this battle on a year-end basis. We've got to make a decision of whether we're going to license these guys or tell them to go away forever. And so they brought in experts to provide testimony on both sides of the issue. And the individuals that were speaking out against chiropractic licensure were represented by the deans of 4 medical schools in the state of New York. And here's what they said. They said, it is an incredible anachronism that in an age when this nation leads the world in many areas of scientific endeavors, New York State should be asked to place its seal of approval on a group of persons claiming to be practitioners who are largely ignorant of the accepted and proven science of health and disease. Now, guys, I'll be honest, I don't know what the chiropractors said or those representing the chiropractors. I'm unable to find a record of it, but I have a pretty good idea of what they said. I think they probably said, hey, listen, guys, remember they're talking to the politicians, they're talking to the lawmakers. They said, you know what, we've got a pretty large political action committee and we can bring in lots of votes and write lots of checks to help you guys get reelected in office. The reason I think that is because after listening to this, the lawmakers said, yeah, why not? Let's go ahead and license these guys. Thumbs up, absolutely. And they were in. Unfortunately, most of the dozen or so states that to that point had not yet granted licensure were watching and waiting to see what New York would do, and they went ahead and followed suit and granted licensure. Does anybody in the audience know which 2 states held out the longest? What were the last 2 states to grant licensure to chiropractors? Anybody know? I'll give you a hint. It was in about 1975 when this happened. So it was a dozen years later, 2 states held out almost simultaneously. Want to take a guess? How about Louisiana and Mississippi? Which I love this because 2 states that the elite of our country consider the backwoods hicks of the world, more or less, in my opinion, maybe the smartest folks around. Moving along, with regard to Medicare funding, in 1967, not long after Congress passed the Medicare Act, they asked the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, what about these chiropractor guys? Do we include them in this newfangled Medicare program? And they weren't sure, so like the lawmakers in New York, they brought in experts to provide testimony and prepare data. And the final report was entitled The Independent Practitioners Under Medicare, of which I proudly have actually 2 copies, the other one being locked in my safe deposit box. The report was delivered to Congress on December 28, 1968 by HEW Secretary Wilbur Cohen. I'm going to read you the summary of that report. It says, chiropractic theory and practice are not based upon the body of basic knowledge related to health, disease, and health care that has been widely accepted by the scientific community. Moreover, irrespective of its theory, the scope and quality of chiropractic education do not prepare the practitioner to make an adequate diagnosis and provide adequate treatment. Therefore, it is recommended that chiropractic service not be covered in the Medicare program. Does anybody want to take a guess on what the politicians in Washington, D.C. did following this report? I want to guess. Quickly, we've got short time. I'll tell you, they said, no way, thumbs down, no chiropractic in Medicare. They actually listened to the scientists and they did the right thing. They said, hell no, no chiropractic. And you'd have thought that that might be the beginning of the end. But no, no, no. Once again, that powerful chiropractic lobby that we talked about went to work, and 4 years later, in 1972, the Medicare law was revised to allow payment for chiropractic under Medicare, but only if, ladies and gentlemen, only if a subluxation could be documented on plain film x-ray. And can you believe that for the next 3 decades or so, can you imagine how many millions and billions of dollars were wasted in Medicare fraudulently because there's never been a subluxation chiropractically documented on film. And then I believe in 2001, that law was quietly made to go away when they realized that it was really sort of useless. So again, moving along the milestones to legitimacy, I'm going to skip over federally funded research, the NCCAM and the VA in the interest of time, and just quickly talk about the Florida State University Chiropractic Program. You know, by the end of the 20th century, they had moved pretty well with these milestones along the path of legitimacy. But the one thing that they didn't have, the one thing that they really lacked, was university affiliation. All the chiropractic schools were sort of mom and pop private schools, none of which were affiliated with any state university, public university, or major university. Well, the state of Florida, by the time that 2001 rolled around, had 2 very high-level politicians, one in the House and one in the Senate, that were chiropractors. And these guys managed to get a bill signed into law by Governor Jeb Bush in 2004 that mandated the opening of a school of chiropractic on the campus of Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. Unbelievable, but they got it done. Money was appropriated, millions of dollars were appropriated, faculty were starting to be recruited, a dean was tentatively identified, and the folks in Tallahassee were not very happy about this. Tallahassee happens to be the capital of Florida, if you don't know that, a large medical community there, and a well-respected academic university, and the folks there were not very happy, but they figured there was nothing they could do. It was a law. And this wasn't just an idea, this was a law in the books. And so they all sort of sat on their hands and grumbled and moaned. Well, not long after this happened, because it happened in March, the law was signed by Jeb Bush in March, a group of out-of-state instigators, as they were known, which I'm proud to be a member of, decided to take this on. And the reason that we decided to take this on was there was a precedent, because this has happened a dozen or so times in Canada. Chiropractors had made an effort to get university affiliation. And in each and every instance in Canada, when the evidence was really brought forth and demonstrated to the public and those involved, it was always squashed. It never happened. So we knew it could be done. We started basically a letter writing campaign. We got a hold of everybody that we could get a hold of that had any power or authority in the state of Florida, media, politicians, university regents, et cetera. We ultimately published 2 documents, which we sent out again to our massive mailing list that we had compiled. And we sort of spun our wheels for 4 or 5 or 6 months, not really seeming to get a whole lot of attention. And then we got a real break in November of 2004 when we got a guy named Ray Bellamy, who's an orthopedic surgeon and third-generation FSU alumnus on faculty there, to sort of join in with us and be our guy on the ground in Tallahassee. And once Ray got involved, we got a petition that was signed by a large number of the academics in town, including the 2 Nobel laureates, and all of a sudden the media got interested, and CNN and Time Magazine all took an interest in this, and the end result was that in January 27th to be precise, the Florida Board of Governors, which is sort of a body that oversees the boards of trustees of all, I believe there's 11 public schools in the state of Florida, voted to kill the program. And I'm happy to say that Ray and myself were the 2 individuals there that spoke out against the program. And even though, as best I can tell, it remains a law in the books in Florida, there will never be a chiropractic school in any state university in the state of Florida, and hopefully nowhere else. So this one is one that went bad, right? That didn't happen. But as you see, like all these other things, it was all political. It all happened through politics. Even though in the end run, it was the academics that made the decision and killed it, when the politicians were involved, they made it happen. So this is just an example of how these guys have gotten where they have. And I'm going to pause for a second and just say, just because they got here, made their road to legitimacy through politics, does not mean that politics is necessarily bad, or that you all, as physical therapists or medical doctors or whoever, shouldn't use the political process. You should. Absolutely you should. But it's just an example of what they've been able to do through their intense lobbying and political action. Okay, when I talk about chiropractic, I spend a lot of time talking about the dangers of chiropractic, and I'm not telling you that chiropractors are killing people left and right. They're not. What I'm really trying to say is that, in my opinion, the risk does not, or the benefit does not outweigh the risk. Okay, that's all I'm trying to say. So let's take a look at the risk-benefit ratio. In the last 20 years, I've made literally dozens of undercover visits to chiropractors' offices. I've spent an entire day posing as a prospective student on the campus of Palmer Chiropractic College in Davenport, Iowa. I have spent countless thousands of hours talking to chiropractors on the phone, in person, and in email. And what I hear over and over from chiropractors is that chiropractic works. And if you don't know what that phrase means, what it means is, if I'm a chiropractor and I say chiropractic works, it means I don't really care about your scientific studies. I'm not interested in your randomized controlled trials or your evidence-based care. I believe chiropractic works in my heart, and that's good enough for me. That's all I need. Chiropractic works. So the question is, folks, does it work? Yes or no? Well, in order to answer this, I think it makes sense to break it into 2 categories: treatment of musculoskeletal conditions, primarily low back pain, neck pain, and headache, and non-musculoskeletal things, everything else, PMS, ear infections, on and on. And I'll just say right off the bat that I am not in any way, shape, or form an expert in manipulative therapy or the treatment of musculoskeletal disease. In fact, I'm not even an amateur. I know only what I've managed to pick up from experts in physical therapy and what I've been able to read. But here's what I understand. Here's my understanding of it. There's not a single legitimate scientific study that says that chiropractic works in the treatment of musculoskeletal disease, including low back pain. Not a single one. If there is, please let me know. However, there are lots of studies, legitimate studies, good studies, that say that manipulative therapy works in the treatment of musculoskeletal disease, including low back pain, right? But we've already said early on that chiropractic and manipulative therapy aren't the same thing, right? They're not. But since chiropractors use manipulative therapy, let's at least take a look at this for a second.